My name is Emma Rodriguez, and I am 22 years old. I should probably start by telling you that I have always been the kind of person who believes in the magic of birthdays, even when life keeps proving me wrong. Maybe it is because I am the older child, or maybe it is just part of who I am, but I have never outgrown that flutter of excitement that comes with waking up on October 15th. This morning was no different. My alarm buzzed at 6:30, and I opened my eyes in my small bedroom in Boulder, Colorado, feeling that familiar spark of anticipation. I share this apartment with two roommates, Sarah and Jessica, both graduate students who are far more organized than I will ever be. The walls are thin enough that I can hear everything. Sarah getting ready for her morning run, the neighbor's dog barking, the early commuters on Arapahoe Avenue heading to work. I stretched under my thrift store comforter, the one with tiny sunflowers that I bought 3 years ago when I first moved out of my parents' house in Denver. It has a small tear near the corner that I keep meaning to fix but never do. These imperfect details make up my life now, small, ordinary, but entirely mine. My family consists of my parents, David and Maria Rodriguez, and my younger brother Marcus, who is 19 and a sophomore at Colorado State University. Dad works in construction management, and Mom manages a dental office. We are solidly middle class, the kind of family that takes vacations to national parks and argues about politics at dinner, but still loves each other underneath it all. At least, that is what I tell myself. I rolled out of bed and padded to the kitchen in my oversized University of Colorado sweatshirt and flannel pajama pants. The hardwood floors were cold against my bare feet, and I could hear Sarah moving around in the bathroom. Jessica had already left for her early shift at the downtown coffee shop, where she works to help pay for her master's program in social work. Our kitchen is small but functional, with white cabinets that the landlord has painted over so many times that the doors do not close properly anymore. I filled the electric kettle and plugged it in, then grabbed my favorite mug, a slightly lopsided ceramic piece I made in a pottery class freshman year. It holds exactly the right amount of tea, which feels like a small victory in a world where so many things do not fit quite right. While waiting for the water to boil, I checked my phone. No messages yet, but it was still early. I made my tea, Earl Grey with honey, and sat at our wobbly dining table, looking out at Mr. Peterson's backyard garden. He is our elderly neighbor who grows tomatoes and peppers in raised beds he built himself. Even though frost will probably kill his plants within the next few weeks, he was already out there in his flannel shirt and worn jeans, checking on them like they were his children. I have been a student at the University of Colorado Boulder for 4 years now, majoring in English with a minor in psychology. I work part-time at the campus bookstore, which pays enough to cover my share of rent and groceries but not much else. My parents help with tuition, which I am grateful for, even though they never let me forget it is a sacrifice for them. Marcus, on the other hand, seems to glide through life without the same financial stress. He is studying pre-med at Colorado State, and somehow his expenses always seem to be covered without the same conversations about money that I remember from my college years. Maybe it is because he is the younger child, or maybe it is because he is studying something they see as more practical than English literature. Sarah emerged from the bathroom in a cloud of vanilla-scented body wash, her dark hair wrapped in a towel. She is getting her master's degree in environmental science, and always seems to have everything perfectly organized in a way that makes me slightly envious. "Morning, Emma," she said, grabbing a banana from the fruit bowl. "Morning," I replied, wondering if she remembered what day it was. We have been roommates for 8 months now, and while we get along well, we are more like friendly strangers than close friends. "I have got that big presentation today," Sarah continued, peeling her banana. "The one about water conservation in urban environments. I have been working on it for weeks." "You will do great," I said, meaning it. Sarah is the kind of person who has color-coded notes and backup slides for her backup slides. She grabbed her reusable water bottle and laptop bag, then paused at the door. "Oh, and happy birthday, by the way." I saw it on the calendar in my phone. The warmth that spread through my chest was probably disproportionate to such a simple gesture, but it felt good to be remembered by someone, even if it was just a roommate who had programmed it into her phone. "Thank you, Sarah. That really means a lot. Any big plans?" she asked, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Just class and work, maybe dinner with my family later if they are free." "Well, I hope it turns out to be a good day," she said. and then she was gone, leaving me alone with my tea and the sound of Mr. Peterson talking to his tomato plants. I finished my tea and got ready for class, choosing a navy blue sundress with small white flowers that I bought on sale at Target last spring. It makes me feel put together, even though it cost $12. I paired it with my denim jacket and the brown leather boots I saved up for 3 months to buy. Sometimes I think my entire identity is built around making cheap things look intentional. The walk to campus takes about 15 minutes, and I love the October air in Colorado. The trees along the path were showing off their fall colors, brilliant yellows and oranges and deep reds that made the whole world look like it was on fire in the best possible way. Other students were making their way to early classes, some looking alert and caffeinated, others clearly running on minimal sleep and maximum determination. I grabbed coffee from the Student Union building and found a quiet spot at one of the outdoor tables to review my notes before American literature. The class focuses on 20th century writers, and today we were discussing Joan Didion's essays about loss and grief. I have read The Year of Magical Thinking twice, and each time it leaves me feeling raw and contemplative about the ways we cope with the unthinkable. My phone buzzed, and I looked down to see a text from my mom. "Hope you have a wonderful day at school, sweetheart. Dad and I are thinking of you." No mention of my birthday specifically, but that was okay. She was thinking of me, and that counted for something. I texted back, "Thanks, Mom. Love you too." Professor Martinez was already in the classroom when I arrived, arranging papers on his desk and sipping from a mug that said, "World's Okayest Teacher." He is in his 50s, with graying hair and thick-rimmed glasses that make him look like he stepped out of a literary magazine. He has a way of making even the most reluctant students engage with difficult texts, and his class has become one of my favorites. "Good morning, everyone," he said, as students filed in. "I hope you all had a chance to read the Didion essays for today. I know they are not exactly light reading, but they are important." I settled into my usual seat in the third row, next to David, who is majoring in English and always has insightful comments about whatever we are reading. He nodded at me as I sat down, and I wondered if he had any idea it was my birthday. Probably not, and that was fine. We are classroom acquaintances, not close friends. The discussion that followed was intense and thoughtful. Professor Martinez asked questions that made you think about texts in ways you had not considered before. Today he focused on how Didion wrote about the gap between what we expect from life and what actually happens. "She writes about the stories we tell ourselves," he said, pacing in front of the whiteboard. "The narratives we create to make sense of senseless things." "How do you think this relates to the way we process disappointment?" A student named Amy raised her hand. "I think we all have these expectations about how things should go, and when they do not match reality, we have to figure out how to cope with that gap." "Exactly," Professor Martinez said. "And Didion shows us that sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are not helpful. Sometimes they keep us stuck in patterns that do not serve us." I thought about my own stories, the ones I tell myself about family and birthdays, and what it means to be loved. The narrative I have constructed about today, about the phone calls and messages and acknowledgments that will make me feel seen and valued. Maybe I am setting myself up for disappointment by expecting too much from a day that is, ultimately, just another Tuesday in October. After class, I walked across campus to the library, where I had about an hour before my next class. The library is one of my favorite places, quiet and full of possibilities, with tall windows that let in natural light and comfortable chairs where you can lose yourself in a book for hours. I found a spot at one of the long wooden tables and pulled out my laptop to work on a paper for my social psychology class. The assignment was about group dynamics and social influence, and I was writing about how family systems shape individual behavior. It felt relevant to my own life, in ways that made me slightly uncomfortable. My phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a text from Marcus. "Hey sis, how are classes going?" I stared at the message for a moment, waiting for the follow-up text that would acknowledge what day it was. When it did not come, I typed back, "Good, just working on a paper. How are things at CSU?" "Pretty good. Got a big exam tomorrow in organic chemistry. Mom and Dad are driving up this weekend to take me to that new steakhouse in Old Town. Should be fun." I read his message twice, feeling something twist in my stomach. A weekend trip to Fort Collins is not a big deal. It is only an hour-and-a-half drive from Denver, but it is the kind of gesture that shows thought and planning. It is the kind of thing parents do when they want to celebrate their child. I tried to push the feeling away. Marcus has an exam, and maybe they are just being supportive. It does not necessarily mean anything about me or my birthday, or how our parents feel about their children. But the thought lingered as I tried to focus on my paper. The hour passed quickly, and soon I was walking to my social psychology class in the building next door. The classroom was larger, with stadium-style seating that made it feel like a lecture hall. Professor Chen was already setting up her presentation, and students were filtering in with varying degrees of enthusiasm. I took a seat in the middle section and pulled out my notebook. The class was about conformity and social pressure, and Professor Chen started by showing us videos of the famous Ash experiments, where people gave obviously wrong answers to simple questions just to fit in with the group. "What we see here," Professor Chen said, pointing to the screen, "is how powerful the need for acceptance can be. People will literally deny the evidence of their own eyes to avoid standing out or being rejected by the group." She clicked to the next slide, which showed statistics about conformity in different cultures. But conformity is not always negative. Sometimes it serves important social functions. The question is, when does conformity help us, and when does it harm us? I thought about my own family dynamics, about the unspoken rules and expectations that govern our interactions. Am I conforming to something that is not serving me? Am I accepting treatment that I would never accept from friends or strangers, simply because it comes from family? After class, I had 3 hours before my shift at the bookstore, so I decided to walk downtown and grab lunch. Boulder's Pearl Street Mall is always busy during lunch hours, with street performers and vendors and the kind of eclectic mix of people that makes the city feel alive. I bought a sandwich from Snarf's and found a bench where I could eat and people watch. A man with a guitar was playing Beatles songs near the fountain, and a small crowd had gathered to listen. Children were running around while their parents chatted, and college students were scattered at various tables, studying or laughing with friends. I checked my phone again. Still no messages from my parents about my birthday. Marcus had not mentioned it either, even though he had texted me earlier. Maybe they are planning something, I told myself. Maybe they are waiting until later in the day to surprise me. But even as I thought it, I knew it was not true. If they were planning something, my mom would have already called to make sure I was free. She is not the type to leave things to chance or to surprise people without careful coordination. I finished my sandwich and walked back toward campus, taking the long way through the residential neighborhoods near the university. The houses are a mix of styles. Some old Victorians converted into apartments, some newer constructions trying to blend in with the historic architecture, and some that look like they were built in the 70s and have not been updated since. I passed a house where a woman was raking leaves in her front yard while her toddler played in a pile of them. The scene was so perfectly domestic that it made me feel homesick, even though I was not sure what exactly I was homesick for. My childhood had not been filled with scenes like this. My parents had been busy with work and social obligations, and our yard had been maintained by a landscaping service. The bookstore was quiet when I arrived for my shift. My manager, Janet, was behind the counter processing returns, and she looked up when I walked in. "Hey, Emma," she said. "How are you doing today?" "Good," I said, hanging up my jacket in the back room. "How has it been here?" "Pretty slow. A few students came in looking for textbooks, but mostly it has been quiet." Janet is in her 60s, with silver hair that she wears in a neat bob, and the kind of practical clothing that suggests she has given up on fashion in favor of comfort. She has been working at the bookstore for 15 years and knows every regular customer by name. I spent the first hour of my shift restocking shelves and organizing the display of local authors near the front of the store. The work is methodical and soothing, and I found myself thinking about the Didion essays we had discussed in class. She wrote about the stories we tell ourselves, about the gap between expectation and reality. What stories am I telling myself about my family, about my place in their lives, about what I deserve or should expect from the people who are supposed to love me unconditionally? Around 4 o'clock, a group of middle-aged women came in looking for books for their book club. They were discussing the pros and cons of various novels, and their conversation was animated and friendly. I helped them find what they were looking for, and as they left, one of them turned back to me. "Thank you for your help, dear," she said. "I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day." It was such a small kindness, but it made me smile. Sometimes strangers can be more thoughtful than the people who know you best. The afternoon passed slowly. A few more customers came and went, but mostly I spent the time organizing inventory and helping Janet with administrative tasks. Around 6 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a call from my mom. "Hi, sweetheart," she said when I answered. "How was your day?" It was good, I said, stepping into the back room for privacy. Just classes and work. That sounds nice. Dad and I are having dinner with the Johnsons tonight. Remember them? They live in the house with the big maple tree on our street. Anyway, we might be home late. I waited for her to mention my birthday, to ask if I wanted to join them for dinner, to suggest we celebrate another time. But she just chatted about her day at the dental office and asked about my classes. Well, I should let you get back to work, she said finally. We love you, Emma. Love you too, Mom, I said, and hung up. I stood in the back room for a moment, surrounded by boxes of books and the smell of old paper. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed slightly, and I could hear Janet helping a customer in the front of the store. This is my life. Ordinary moments in ordinary places, with ordinary disappointments that feel anything but ordinary when you are living through them. When I returned to the front of the store, Janet looked at me with concern. Everything okay? Yeah, I said, because what else could I say? That my parents have forgotten my birthday? That I feel invisible in my own family? That I am 22 years old and still hoping for something that is probably never going to come? You know, Janet said, today is my daughter's birthday. She is turning 35, and she lives in Seattle now. I sent her flowers this morning. The words hit me like a physical blow. I managed to smile and say something appropriate about how nice that was, but inside I felt like I was crumbling. Here was a woman who remembered her adult daughter's birthday and sent flowers across the country, while my own parents were having dinner with neighbors and had not even mentioned what day it was. The last 2 hours of my shift dragged by. By the time 8 o'clock came, I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the work I had been doing. I said goodbye to Janet and walked home through the darkening streets, past the same houses and trees I had passed that morning, but everything looked different now. When I got back to the apartment, both of my roommates were there. Sarah was at the kitchen table grading papers, and Jessica was on the couch watching Netflix. Hey, Jessica said when I walked in. How was work? Fine, I said, dropping my bag by the door. Oh, by the way, she said, there is leftover pizza in the fridge if you want some, and I think there is ice cream in the freezer. It was not a birthday dinner, but it was food, and I was grateful for it. I heated up 2 slices of pizza and ate them standing at the kitchen counter while Sarah worked on her grading. The apartment felt warm and lived in, and for a moment I felt lucky to have these people in my life, even if they are not family. I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang. It was Marcus. Hey, he said when I answered. What are you up to? Just getting ready for bed, I said. What about you? Studying for that organic chemistry exam I told you about. It is going to be brutal. We talked for a few minutes about his classes and mine, and then he said something that made my heart skip. Oh, and I forgot to mention earlier, Mom and Dad are not just taking me to dinner this weekend. They booked us a room at that resort in Estes Park. You know, the one with the spa and the mountain views? We are going to make a whole weekend of it. I sat down on my bed, feeling like the air had been knocked out of me. That sounds amazing, I managed to say. Yeah, I am really looking forward to it. Mom said it is because I have been working so hard in school, and she wants to do something special. Something special. For him. For working hard in school, which is what students are supposed to do. Which is what I have been doing for 4 years. Well, I hope you have a great time, I said, and I meant it, even though it hurt. Thanks, sis. I should get back to studying. Talk to you later. After he hung up, I sat on my bed in the dark for a long time. Outside my window, I could hear the sounds of the city settling into night. Cars passing on the street, someone's television, the distant sound of music from a party somewhere nearby. I thought about calling my parents, about asking them directly if they knew what day it was. But I could not bring myself to do it. If they have forgotten, I do not want to guilt them into remembering. And if they have not forgotten, if they simply do not care enough to acknowledge it, then I do not want to know that either. Instead, I got ready for bed and tried to tell myself that birthdays are just arbitrary dates, that the passage of time is worth celebrating every day, not just once a year. But even as I thought it, I knew I was trying to convince myself of something I do not quite believe. As I lay in bed, I thought about the stories we tell ourselves, about the gap between what we expect and what we get. Maybe the problem is not that my family has forgotten my birthday. Maybe the problem is that I expect them to remember. expect them to care in ways they have never shown they care. Maybe it is time to tell myself a different story. I woke up the next morning feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides during the night. The sunlight streaming through my bedroom window felt too bright, too cheerful for how I was feeling. It was Wednesday, October 16th, and my 22nd birthday was officially over. Not that anyone besides Sarah and Janet had noticed it happening in the first place. I lay in bed for longer than usual, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of my roommates getting ready for their days. Sarah was in the kitchen making her usual smoothie, and Jessica was blow-drying her hair in the bathroom. Normal sounds for a normal day, which is exactly what yesterday had turned out to be for everyone except me. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent. No missed calls, no belated birthday messages, no acknowledgement that anything significant had happened. I picked it up and scrolled through my social media feeds, watching other people celebrate their achievements, their relationships, their ordinary moments that somehow seemed more meaningful than mine. I have always been the type of person who processes emotions by moving, so I forced myself out of bed and into my running clothes. The October air was crisp when I stepped outside, and I could see my breath in small puffs as I started jogging down the familiar streets of my neighborhood. Running has been my therapy since high school. When I feel overwhelmed or confused or hurt, I put one foot in front of the other until my thoughts settle into some kind of order. This morning, I needed that clarity more than usual. As I ran past the coffee shops and bookstores and vintage clothing stores that make up the fabric of Boulder, I found myself thinking about patterns. In my social psychology class, we had learned about something called learned helplessness, the way people stop trying to change their circumstances when they have been conditioned to believe their efforts do not matter. Was that what I was experiencing with my family? Had I learned to accept being overlooked because it had happened so many times that it felt normal? I thought about the weekend getaway Marcus was getting, and I tried to examine my feelings about it objectively. Was I jealous of the trip itself, or was I hurt by what it represented? The answer, I realized, was complicated. I was not particularly interested in going to a resort in Estes Park, but I was devastated by the message it sent about my value in my parents' eyes. When had this pattern started? I tried to trace it back through my memories, looking for the moment when I had become the child who was taken for granted. Maybe it was when Marcus was born and needed more attention as a baby. Maybe it was when I started doing well in school, and my parents assumed I would always be fine without extra support. Maybe it was just the natural result of being the older, more responsible child. Or maybe it was not about being older or younger. Maybe it was about something else entirely. I ran for about 45 minutes, winding through the residential streets near campus, and then looping back toward my apartment. By the time I got home, Sarah had already left for class, and Jessica was getting ready to leave for work. "Morning," she said, grabbing her keys from the hook by the door. "You are up early." "Could not sleep," I said, which was partially true. Decided to go for a run instead. "Good for you. I keep meaning to start exercising in the mornings, but I am too much of a night owl." After she left, I stood in the shower longer than usual, letting the hot water wash away the sweat and hopefully some of the sadness that seemed to have settled into my bones. I had 2 classes today, and another shift at the bookstore, which meant I needed to pull myself together and function like a normal person. My first class was Contemporary Women Writers, taught by Professor Williams, a woman in her 40s who had published 2 novels and had strong opinions about everything from Virginia Woolf to Roxane Gay. Today we were discussing Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Americana, and specifically the passages about identity and belonging. I usually loved this class, but today I found it hard to concentrate. Professor Williams was talking about the protagonist's sense of displacement, about feeling caught between 2 worlds and not fully belonging to either one. The words resonated with me in a way that felt uncomfortably relevant. Ifemelu struggles with the gap between how she sees herself and how others see her, Professor Williams said, pacing in front of the whiteboard. This disconnect creates a kind of identity crisis that many immigrants experience, but it is not limited to questions of nationality or culture. We all have moments when we feel misunderstood or misrepresented by the people who are supposed to know us best. A student named Rachel raised her hand. "Do you think that disconnect is always painful, or can it sometimes be liberating?" "That is an excellent question," Professor Williams said. "I think it depends on whether you have agency in defining yourself, or whether you feel trapped by other people's perceptions. I thought about my family's perception of me. They saw me as the responsible one, the one who would always be okay, the one who did not need special attention or celebration. But was that really who I was? Or was that just the role I had learned to play? After class, I walked to the campus coffee shop and ordered a large latte. The barista was a guy I recognized from my American literature class, and he smiled when he saw me. "Hey, Emma, right?" he said. "How is Professor Martinez's class going?" "Good," I said. "That discussion about Didion yesterday was intense." "Yeah, she really knows how to get under your skin," he said, handing me my coffee. "Her writing makes you think about uncomfortable things." As I walked to my next class, I found myself thinking about Didion again, about the stories we tell ourselves and the gap between expectation and reality. What if the story I had been telling myself about my family was wrong? What if they were not deliberately overlooking me, but simply operating from a different set of assumptions about what I needed? My second class was Introduction to Linguistics, which was supposed to be an easy elective, but had turned out to be surprisingly challenging. Today we were learning about pragmatics, the study of how context affects meaning in communication. The professor, Dr. Hassan, was explaining how the same words can mean completely different things depending on the situation and the relationship between the speakers. "For example," he said, writing on the whiteboard, "if I say nice job to you after a presentation, the meaning depends on my tone, our relationship, and the context of your performance. It could be genuine praise, sarcasm, or something in between." This made me think about the conversations I had with my family. How much of our communication was happening below the surface? When my mom said, "We love you, Emma," at the end of our phone call yesterday, what did that actually mean? Was it a genuine expression of affection, or was it a way of ending the conversation without having to engage more deeply? After class, I had 3 hours before my shift at the bookstore, so I decided to go to the library and work on the paper I was writing about family systems. It felt appropriate, given everything I was processing. I found a quiet corner on the 3rd floor and opened my laptop. The assignment was to analyze how communication patterns within families can perpetuate dysfunction across generations. I had chosen to focus on emotional neglect, the kind that happens not through active harm, but through the absence of attention and validation. As I researched and wrote, I found myself thinking about my own family in more clinical terms. My parents were not abusive or deliberately cruel. They provided for Marcus and me financially. They attended our important events when they remembered, and they said they loved us. But there was something missing, some level of emotional attunement that I had always craved but never quite received. I wrote about how children learn to suppress their needs when those needs are consistently unmet or dismissed. I wrote about how some children become hypervigilant about other people's emotions while losing touch with their own. I wrote about how the absence of acknowledgement can be as damaging as the presence of criticism. It was academic writing, objective and research-based, but every paragraph felt deeply personal. I was not just analyzing family systems in general. I was trying to understand my own. Around 3 o'clock, I walked to the bookstore for my shift. Janet was training a new employee, a freshman named Tyler, who seemed overwhelmed by the computer system and kept asking the same questions repeatedly. I spent the first hour helping him learn the basics while Janet handled the more complicated transactions. "You are really patient with him," Janet said, when Tyler went to help a customer find a textbook. "Not everyone would be so understanding." "I remember feeling completely lost when I started here," I said. "It helps when someone takes the time to actually explain things." "That is true," Janet said, "but not everyone remembers what it was like to be new. Some people get so used to being competent that they forget how scary it can be to not know what you are doing." Her words stuck with me as I worked through the afternoon. Maybe that was part of what was happening with my family. Maybe they had gotten so used to seeing me as capable and independent that they had forgotten I still needed care and attention, just like everyone else. Around 5 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hope you had a good day yesterday. Sorry I did not call. I was swamped with studying." I stared at the message for a long time. Yesterday. Not on your birthday, just yesterday. As if October 15th had been just another day, notable only for the fact that he had been too busy to call his sister. I typed and deleted several responses. Part of me wanted to tell him that it had been my birthday, to make him feel guilty for not remembering. Part of me wanted to ask him directly why our parents seemed to care more about his academic stress than anything happening in my life. But I could not bring myself to send either of those messages. Instead, I wrote back, "No worries. How did your exam go?" "Think I did okay," he replied. "Really looking forward to this weekend, though. Mom has been planning all these activities for us to do at the resort. She even made reservations at some fancy restaurant for Saturday night." Each detail felt like a small knife twisting in my chest. The planning, the reservations, the excitement in his voice even through text. It was everything I had hoped for and never received. "That sounds amazing," I typed, because what else could I say? "Yeah, I am lucky to have such thoughtful parents," he wrote back. Lucky. The word echoed in my mind for the rest of my shift. Was Marcus lucky to have thoughtful parents? Or did he simply inspire more thoughtfulness than I did? Was there something about me that made me less worthy of weekend getaways and fancy dinners and careful planning? When my shift ended at 8, I walked home through the darkening streets, past the houses with warm light spilling from their windows. I could see families gathered around dinner tables, children doing homework while parents cooked, the kinds of domestic scenes that always made me feel both nostalgic and envious. Back at the apartment, both of my roommates were home. Sarah was on the couch grading papers, and Jessica was in the kitchen making pasta. "Want some?" Jessica asked when she saw me. I made way too much. "That would be great," I said, grateful for the offer. "Thank you." As we ate together at our wobbly table, I found myself feeling more cared for by these near strangers than I had felt by my own family in months. Jessica asked about my day, Sarah told us about a presentation she had given, and we talked about our plans for the weekend. It was ordinary conversation, but there was an attentiveness to it that I realized I had been missing. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked as we were cleaning up. "You seem a little quiet tonight." I almost told her everything then, about my forgotten birthday, about Marcus's weekend getaway, about the growing realization that something in my family was fundamentally off balance, but I could not quite bring myself to do it. "Just tired," I said instead. "Long day." Later that night, I lay in bed scrolling through social media, which I knew was a bad idea but could not seem to stop myself from doing. My feed was full of birthday posts, friends celebrating with elaborate parties, families posting tribute photos, couples going out for special dinners. The contrast between their experiences and mine felt stark and painful. I found myself looking at my own profile, at the photos I had posted over the past year. There were pictures of me with friends, shots of books I was reading, landscapes from hikes I had taken. But looking at them now, I realized how few included my family. We did not take photos together very often, did not document our time together in the way that other families seemed to. Was that significant, or was I reading too much into everything? I closed the app and put my phone aside, but sleep did not come easily. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. Why did my parents plan elaborate weekends for Marcus but not for me? Why did they remember his academic stress but not my birthday? Why did I always feel like I was auditioning for love that should have been unconditional? And underneath all of those questions was a deeper, more frightening one. What if this was not about them at all? What if there was something fundamentally unlovable about me that I could not see but everyone else could? I tried to push that thought away, but it lingered as I finally drifted off to sleep. In my dreams, I was running through an endless maze, calling out for my family, but every time I thought I heard them respond, I would turn a corner and find myself alone again. The next morning, I woke up feeling slightly more resolved. I could not control how my family treated me, but I could control how I responded to it. I could choose to stop waiting for them to change and start focusing on building the life I wanted, regardless of their participation. I made my tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching Mr. Peterson tend to his garden. Even though frost was coming and his plants would not survive much longer, he was still out there caring for them. There was something admirable about that dedication, that refusal to give up even when the outcome was uncertain. Maybe that was what I needed to do. Stop focusing on the frost and start tending to my own garden. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Hi, sweetheart. Hope you are having a good week. Dad and I are driving up to see Marcus tomorrow. We might stop by Boulder on the way back if you are free Sunday evening." Might stop by. If I was free? As if my schedule was an afterthought, something to be considered only if it was convenient for them. But instead of feeling hurt, I found myself feeling something else. Clarity. This was who they were. This was how they operated. I could keep expecting them to change, or I could accept reality and adjust my expectations accordingly. I texted back, "I have plans Sunday evening, but thanks for thinking of me." It was not entirely true, I did not have specific plans, but it felt important to establish that my time had value, that they could not assume I would always be available whenever they happened to have a free moment. A few minutes later, she responded, "Oh, okay, maybe next time." No follow-up questions about what my plans were, no suggestion of alternative times to meet, just a casual dismissal that confirmed everything I had been feeling. But for the first time in days, I did not feel devastated by her response. Instead, I felt something like relief. The uncertainty was over. I knew where I stood, and I could stop hoping for something that was not going to come. I finished my tea and got ready for class, choosing clothes that made me feel confident and capable. I had a full day ahead of me, 2 classes, a study group for my linguistics course, and then a quiet evening at home. It was not the life I had imagined for myself at 22, but it was mine, and that was enough. As I walked to campus, I thought about the weekend that Marcus and my parents would spend together. They would have nice dinners and relaxing spa treatments and meaningful conversations. Marcus would feel loved and valued and special, and I would be here in Boulder, living my own life, making my own choices, building relationships with people who actually saw me and appreciated me. It was not the same thing, but it was not necessarily worse. Maybe it was even better. The thought surprised me with its power. For the first time since my birthday, I felt something other than sadness. I felt possibility. I thought about Professor Williams's question from yesterday. Could the disconnect between how we see ourselves and how others see us be liberating instead of painful? Maybe it could. Maybe being misunderstood by my family meant I was free to define myself in ways they never would. Maybe their inability to see me clearly meant I did not have to live up to their expectations, or fit into their narrow definitions of who I should be. Maybe their indifference was actually a gift, even if it was not one I had asked for. As I walked into my first class of the day, I felt something shifting inside me. It was subtle, but significant, like the moment when you realize you are no longer homesick, because you have found a new place that feels like home. I was still Emma Rodriguez, the 22-year-old college student whose family had forgotten her birthday. But I was also something else now. Someone who was learning to value herself even when others did not. Someone who was discovering that love could come from unexpected places. Someone who was brave enough to stop waiting for other people to give her permission to matter. It was not the birthday gift I had wanted, but it might have been the one I needed. Friday morning brought the kind of October crispness that makes everything feel possible. I woke up with a strange sense of clarity, as if the emotional fog of the past few days had finally lifted. I was done waiting for my family to see me the way I wanted to be seen. It was time to start seeing myself clearly instead. I made my usual Earl Grey tea and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, but this time I was not wallowing or analyzing. I was planning. If no one was going to celebrate me, I would celebrate myself. If no one was going to acknowledge my worth, I would acknowledge it myself. Sarah emerged from her room in hiking gear, looking surprised to see me up so early. "You seem different today," she said, filling her water bottle. "More settled." "I think I am figuring some things out," I said, finally. After she left, I spent the morning in my contemporary women writers class, where Professor Williams was discussing how characters in literature often reach turning points through disappointment rather than triumph. Sometimes we need to lose the story we thought we were living in order to find the story we are actually living, she said. That loss can be devastating, but it can also be liberating. Her words felt like they were meant specifically for me. I had lost the story where my family treated me the way I wanted to be treated, but maybe I was finding a better story, one where I did not need their validation to know my own value. After class, I walked downtown to the art museum, where they were featuring an exhibition called Invisible Threads, Family Stories in Mixed Media. The timing felt almost too perfect. One piece that stopped me in my tracks was a series of portraits titled The Stories We Tell Ourselves. Each portrait showed how the subject saw themselves versus how their family saw them. The disconnect was often heartbreaking. One portrait of a young woman included 2 descriptions. Her self-description read, "I am creative, independent, and resilient. I value authenticity and meaningful connections." The family description read, "She is the quiet one who never causes trouble. She is practical and responsible. She will be fine no matter what happens." The gap between those narratives felt painfully familiar. Maybe that was exactly how my family saw me, as someone who would always be fine, who did not need the same care and attention that others required. I spent 2 hours in the museum, letting the artwork challenge everything I thought I knew about family and identity. By the time I left, I felt like I had been through therapy I did not know I needed. That evening at the bookstore, I helped a mother and her teenage daughter find books about college essays. The girl was stressed about how to write about herself. "The trick is to find a story that shows who you are rather than telling who you are," I said. "Think about a specific moment that changed how you see yourself." As they left with their books and renewed optimism, I thought about the story I would tell about myself now. It would be different from the one I would have told a week ago, and definitely different from the story my family would tell about me. But it would be mine. Saturday, I decided to create my own celebration. I hiked in Chautauqua Park, reading Mary Oliver poetry on a flat rock overlooking the valley. I treated myself to an expensive coffee and a pastry I could not pronounce. I browsed bookstores and bought myself a beautiful journal with handmade paper. That evening I cooked dinner for my roommates, setting the table with candles and turning an ordinary Saturday into something special. "What is the occasion?" Sarah asked as we sat down. "Just felt like doing something nice," I said. "We work hard. We deserve good food and pleasant company." As we talked and laughed over dinner, I realized this was what I had been craving: genuine connection with people who actually saw me. My roommates might not have known me as long as my family, but they paid attention in ways that mattered. Sunday evening, my parents picked me up for dinner. As I got into their Honda Accord, it felt foreign, like visiting someone else's space rather than belonging there. At the restaurant, we made small talk until my mom asked something that surprised me. "You seemed distant when I called this week. Is everything okay?" This was my moment. I could deflect, or I could be honest. "I have been thinking about family dynamics," I said carefully, "about how we show care for each other." "What do you mean?" my dad asked. I took a breath. "Marcus gets a lot of visible support and celebration. Weekend getaways, special dinners, constant check-ins about his stress. I get love too, but it is quieter, and sometimes I wonder if quiet love is enough." The silence was uncomfortable, but not hostile. "We have always known you were more independent," my dad said finally. "You do not seem to need as much support." "But maybe that is not about need," I said. "Maybe that is about what I learned was available to me." The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had. It was awkward and sometimes painful, but it was real. My parents listened, though not without defensiveness. They asked uncomfortable questions. They acknowledged there might be truth in what I was saying. "We love you and Marcus equally," my mom said. "But maybe we have not shown that love in equal ways." "I know you love me," I said, "but I am questioning whether love is enough if it is not accompanied by the kind of effort that makes someone feel valued." It was not a conversation that resolved everything, but it acknowledged our dynamics instead of pretending they did not exist. It gave me permission to ask for what I needed, instead of just accepting what I was given. When they dropped me off, my mom hugged me longer than usual. "Thank you for being honest," she said. "It is not easy to hear, but it is important." Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and searched for weekend getaways within driving distance. Hot springs resorts, mountain lodges, charming bed and breakfasts. I bookmarked several options and started looking at availability for the following weekend. It would mean using savings, but it felt like an investment in who I was becoming. Someone who celebrated herself, someone who recognized her own worth, someone who did not wait for others to acknowledge what she deserved. In my new journal, I wrote, "My name is Emma Rodriguez. I am 22 years old, and I am learning that love comes in many forms. Some comes from family, even when they do not know how to show it properly. Some comes from friends who pay attention and cook dinner with you. And some comes from yourself, when you finally understand that your opinion of your worth matters most. I am still the kind of person who believes in birthday magic, but now I also believe in creating your own celebrations, advocating for your own needs, building a life that feels meaningful regardless of who shows up to witness it. My family forgot my birthday, but I remembered myself, and that turned out to be the more important gift." 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a cozy cabin at a mountain resort I had booked for myself, watching the sunset paint the peaks orange and gold. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hey sis, hope you are having fun on your solo retreat. Mom told me about your conversation at dinner. Made me think about some things." I smiled and put the phone aside. Whatever he was thinking about could wait. Right now, I was exactly where I needed to be, in a beautiful place I had chosen for myself, feeling proud of the woman I was becoming. For the first time in my life, I did not need anyone else to tell me I was worth celebrating. I already knew.